We're going to start today with a number that, honestly, it should shock you. 56% of millennials are not getting married.
Yeah, that's a staggering majority.
It is. But the real story here, it isn't just about millennials or, avoiding the altar. It goes deeper.
Exactly. This isn't just some Western cultural thing. We're looking at a profound global relationship crisis.
The global one.
Oh, yeah. Across Europe, East Asia, Latin America, the trend is the same. Fewer and fewer Gen Z men and women are even forming stable couples. We're talking long-term partnerships in general.
And that's the foundation for everything else, isn't it? If you don't have stable couples, you don't have family formation.
And that's why it's accelerating the global demographic crisis. Birth rates are they're in free fall worldwide.
So the big question we have to answer today, we've got a stack of some pretty intense research here, sociological, psychological, economic, is why. Why is Gen Z struggling so hard to find stable love?
It really is the defining question of our time. And our mission today is to take those dozens of, really dense research papers and just distill them.
Right.
We want to find the three main modern trends that really explain this crisis. But to get how severe this is, we have to take a quick look back.
Okay, so a little context. Historically, marriage wasn't really about love, was it? It was more of an organizational and economic necessity.
Precisely. For our grandparents' generation, marriage was the ticket. It was the entry point to being a respected adult.
Non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Economically, a man needed a wife to manage the household. I mean, the sheer labor involved was relentless. And a woman with very few professional options, she needed a husband for basic economic security.
And the culture really enforced this. I mean, the penalty for staying single was huge.
Yeah.
Just think about those terms like spinster or old maid. They were basically social death sentences.
And on top of that, you have the practicalities. Sex outside of marriage was so risky. You had limited contraception, massive stigma. So for a lot of people, marriage was the only real path to an active sex life. It was a package deal you pretty much had to accept.
It's fascinating how quickly technology just blew all of that up.
It really is. The rise of electrical appliances, the washing machine, the dishwasher.
The vacuum.
It all reduced that constant demand for domestic labor. And then as societies got wealthier, governments started providing more services, like daycare.
So the reliance on that traditional two-person household unit just plummeted.
It did. Then you add in modern contraception, the liberalization of abortion, and poof, the sexual necessity vanishes too.
So marriage stops being a requirement and it becomes a choice.
A personal choice. And of course, people still wanted stable relationships for, happiness and health. That never went away.
But, and this is the critical pivot for our deep dive today, the trend we're seeing now goes way beyond just avoiding a legal contract. Young people are struggling to find any kind of coupling at all.
Which tells you the reasons aren't just washing machines and condoms anymore. We are looking at much more recent, much more complex challenges.
Yes, and we've organized them into three main explanations that all kind of weave together. First, a huge economic mismatch in the labor market.
Okay.
Second, the smaller but still persistent issue of housing affordability. And third, and this one's huge, the massive psychological shift that's been triggered by digital media.
Okay, so let's start with the money. We really need to unpack this idea of assortative mating.
All right, let's break that down. Assortative mating is basically our tendency to look for partners who are, roughly at our same level.
Same educational background, same socioeconomic status.
Exactly. And historically, that made a lot of sense, right? You wanted someone on a similar path. But today, there were two major economic shifts that are just completely distorting this whole process.
And the first one is this massive educational flip. For decades, you had more college-educated men than women.
That was the norm.
It was. But now, in so many developed countries, the UK, Spain, Korea, and definitely the US, there are substantially more college-educated women than men.
So the logical conclusion, you'd think, is that these highly educated women must be the ones struggling to find partners who meet their standards.
Right, a supply and demand problem.
But the data shows a surprise. Marriage rates for college-educated women in the U.S. are actually pretty stable. It's the non-college-educated women who are increasingly staying single.
So what's going on there? Why isn't this educational flip causing a crisis for the most educated women?
Well, because it turns out education is just a proxy for something else, stability.
Oh, okay.
What economists are seeing is that college-educated women are, in fact, increasingly willing to marry down educationally. But, and this is the absolute key, they are not marrying down economically.
So they're choosing men without degrees, but who are still successful.
Precisely. They're selecting the most successful, non-college educated men. Guys who've maintained high earnings, maybe in the trades or some specialized technical field. So their standard hasn't actually lowered, it's just diversified.
That makes a lot of sense. Financial stability is often more important than the degree hanging on the wall.
Which brings us to the second, and maybe more acute trend, the economic collapse affecting non-college educated men.
Okay, so this is the supply issue for the non-college educated women we were just talking about.
Exactly. While women across the board have been entering the labor force, we've seen this parallel and, frankly, deeply troubling trend.
Which is?
Non-college educated men, especially those who haven't even finished high school, are dropping out of the labor force just altogether.
What's driving that? What's causing that withdrawal?
A huge structural change in the economy. We had this seismic shift away from manufacturing and the heavy industry and towards service and care-based jobs.
Right.
And that shift was great for non-college degree women. They found jobs in healthcare, in education, and all these service sectors.
But it was devastating for the men whose skills were all tied up in that old industrial sector.
Exactly. The demand for muscle just dropped, and those men really struggled to pivot to jobs that required, soft skills and emotional labor.
So now we have this growing pool of non-college educated men who are economically unstable or just withdrawn completely.
And a massive pool of non-college educated women who are, quite rightly, looking for some financial stability in a partner.
The consequences, well, it's stark. Non-college educated women are understandably just not willing to partner with men who don't have a consistent job.
So those men who have withdrawn from the labor market, they basically become invisible.
Or at least highly unattractive in the dating market.
What's so fascinating is how these two trends just lock together. The research, and this is backed up by studies in both the U.S. and Finland, it confirms this.
What's the bottom line?
When men struggle in school and then they fail to transition into this modern service-based economy, it's not just them who lose out.
Both the less educated men and women are far more likely to stay single.
Exactly. This economic mismatch is a primary driver of the entire relationship decline.
Okay, now quickly, before we get to the really psychological stuff, we do have to mention housing.
Right. Housing is always a stress factor. We know in some places, especially high-cost, more traditional areas, it's a huge barrier. There was a survey, I think, a decade ago that showed like 70% of Chinese women required a guy to own a home before marriage.
And yeah, studies from China, Spain, Korea, they all confirm it. High house prices do negatively affect marriage rates. It's like this expensive gatekeeper to what people see as stability.
But, and this is important, the effects are generally pretty small compared to that big economic mismatch we just talked about.
Right.
And crucially, couple formation is declining just as fast in, say, rural America or rural China, where housing is still relatively affordable.
So housing adds stress, but it's not the main thing crippling modern dating.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third, and I would argue the most profound factor, the psychological wall that's been built by smartphones and addictive digital media.
Right. Gen Z is the first generation to go through all of their formative years, middle school, high school, university, with this thing in their pocket constantly.
And the first most obvious result is just isolation. Study after study shows Gen Z is spending way more hours alone at a young age than any previous generation. And this holds true everywhere, the US, the UK, Europe.
So they're not getting that practice, are they? Navigating real in-person social discomfort.
Not at all. And this isolation is correlating with a really rapid, unprecedented shift in their core personality traits. This has been happening since about 2016.
And this is where the psychology really hits relationship viability head on. If we look at the big 5 personality traits, we see these changes that just make coupling inherently more risky.
Let's translate this out of academic speak and into, dating reality, because this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
First, a decline in conscientiousness.
Which is the trait for reliability, self-discipline, follow-through.
Right. So in dating terms, if you have low conscientiousness, you are statistically less dependable.
You're more likely to flake.
You're more likely to flake, less likely to commit to long-term plans, and you're signaling instability without even realizing it. That promise of a reliable future just becomes way harder to sell. It's a massive drawback.
Okay, what's next?
Next, we see a rise in neuroticism. This means more emotional instability, more chronic anxiety, more mood swings.
Which in dating translates to being super sensitive to rejection.
Exactly. So if the dating market already feels brutal, and you're highly anxious and sensitive, you're much more likely to just preemptively ghost someone.
Or withdraw just to avoid getting hurt.
Right. It just adds so much friction and uncertainty right at the beginning of a courtship.
Then there's the decline in agreeableness. This is about empathy, cooperation, warmth.
When you lower agreeableness, you risk coming across as more self-focused, less cooperative, maybe even confrontational.
You become a bad listener.
A terrible listener. And these are the traits that just fundamentally undermine the trust and comfort you need to build intimacy. You just push potential partners away.
And finally, the last one.
The decline in extroversion, which covers, sociability, assertiveness.
And that's just a practical problem, isn't it?
Totally. Less extroversion means less initiative. You're not approaching people. And if young people are already isolated, a lower willingness to put yourself out there means you're totally reliant on the apps.
The same dating apps that so many young people are abandoning out of sheer frustration.
Exactly. So they're just not meeting new partners organically anymore.
So this digital environment is creating a kind of dual catastrophe for relationships.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. On one hand, people just don't have the social skills for a lasting partnership. They're isolated. Their personalities are shifting toward being more volatile, more self-protective.
And on the other hand, the actual way people meet is collapsing. Couples meet less in person. The online platforms are creating this burnout cycle. And the correlational evidence is really striking. I mean, look at a place like South Asia, where internet use, especially among women, is still pretty low.
And what do you see?
Marriage and coupling rates have stayed significantly higher, much more stable. Digital immersion seems to fundamentally change the entire playing field.
And look, the scientific debate is still going on about how much of this is correlation versus direct causation.
Of course.
But the timing, the simultaneous rise of the smartphone, and these deep psychological shifts, it's just undeniable. This is the new reality of dating.
So if we synthesize all this for you, what we see are three complex layers driving this crisis. First, you have the historical end of marriage as an absolute necessity.
Good.
Second, the big structurally economic misalignment, especially with less educated men withdrawing from the labor force, which makes finding stability so much harder for everyone.
And then third.
And third, the radical psychological effect of digital media on our social behavior, on our core personality traits, which just makes vulnerability feel way too risky.
And we have to say it again, this goes so far beyond just an individual struggle. This inability to form couples, it translates directly into population decline. It's fueling demographic fears all over the world.
The good news, though, is that the research does point toward tangible solutions. It's not hopeless.
Okay, so what can be done?
Well, for the economic factors, governments and schools have to get serious about supporting boys all the way through the education system, and then helping non-college educated men transition into this new, care-focused economy.
And we have to, across the board, tackle housing affordability to remove that initial barrier to just starting a life together.
But the social intervention is just as crucial. We need to experiment with policies that limit addictive smartphone and social media use in schools. We need to actively create environments that encourage face-to-face interaction, that let young people actually practice their social skills.
The causes are complex, no doubt, but the patterns they create are becoming crystal clear.
So we've covered the economic squeeze, the housing barrier, and this huge digital psychological shift.
So we want to leave you with this to think about. Which of these three mechanisms, the economic instability, the fear of high housing costs, or this profound loss of social skills from digital media, which one do you believe is the single biggest factor ruining modern dating for your generation? And maybe more importantly, what's one small personal step you could take, starting today, to reclaim some of those crucial social and emotional skills we've seemingly lost? That's something worth thinking about.